Okay, so we're starting our fifth session already, and as usual, we'll backtrack a little bit. But before we do, Tzvi has given us a couple of new pictures to enjoy. This is Tzvi's rendition of the Gimel. Tzvi, is there something you want to say about it?
No, it's just for me. What happens is when I do them, I actually listen to your recording. And then I just play according to what you're saying. Not that it looks anything like what you're saying, but it's just what comes to me while I'm listening to the recording.
Okay, and then we got as well the Dalet from last week.
Yeah, the Dalet, that was a vessel that was going down. That was meant to be like a bucket. And then I realized that it didn't look anything like a bucket, but then there was something coming up. So it was kind of the bucket going down and the light coming up. And again, it was all while I was listening to all of this was going on.
Very good. So you said li is Milashon lidlot, to lift up. And that's the lifting up, or the dalet lifts up the dull person who's down. Okay, so what we're going to do, as we normally do, we're going to backtrack. And what I decided to do is to take Brian's question on this picture that I showed last week. The picture we showed last week at the AlephBet Gimel. And you remember we said that the Aleph gives to Bet. The Aleph is Hashem, is Elohim, is the original light. The Bet is the house, is the Bait, gives it a home. The two of them balance together, and that is the Gimel, is able to gomel, to give to the good. And we said that this corresponds to the Avot, to the three forefathers. Abraham, who started out going out and was always going out, always giving. Yitzchak was more caution, establishing what Abraham had started. And finally, Yaakov, whose quality is emet, which balances the two extremes together, the Aleph and the Taf. And then Brian asked me, he says, well, what is the Dalet? And we spoke last week about Dalet being the receiver, the Dal, the poor person who receives the soul. And the best is to draw the Dalet as, I try to draw it almost as a vessel, almost as a cup, containing, catching all the light that comes from above. In other words, Aleph and Bet started the situation. Sometimes they're also called mother and father, Aleph and Bet. And they have this amazing child who's a balance between them, who's the ultimate giver. And Dalet is the ultimate receiver. And we said last week that is the kingdom, that is Malchut, because symbolized by David, because David can give to everybody. Okay, I see we've got quite a few people. I'm going to put you all on mute, just because there's a little bit of background noise. And if anybody wants to say anything, please feel free to take yourself out of mute. Okay, so now we're going to move on. Wow, welcome, Baruch. Got somebody from Australia on the line, on the call. Honored to have you. Okay, so now we're moving on to the letter Hey. I don't know how to write Hey in Hebrew, in English, I mean. So I just wrote it like this. And what we'll start off like we always do. We'll look at the five qualities, and then we'll try to bring them together into one overall message. And right at the end, we'll see how this fits in with the flow of AlephBet Gimel Dalet. So first of all, the name Hey, the only meaning I could find, and Rav Kook brings it in his book, is actually mentioned in the Torah, and I've quoted the verse here from the end of Berashit, move right forward to the end of the book of Berashit, where Yosef has become the big dude, the big king, second to the king in Egypt. And the whole of Egypt is coming and asking him for food. And eventually what he does is he gives them seeds to let them start things themselves. Let them plant their own food. You know, the Rambam, he talks about different levels of charity. And the highest level of charity is to give someone enough charity or education or money or a combination to help him become independent and support himself. And this is what eventually Yosef does to the Egyptians. After there's famine, after he's giving them food all the time, he says, here, take some seeds. And he obviously blesses them as well, because prior to that, they tried to grow seeds and they couldn't. So the hay over here literally means here, take it. But in the context, what it means, on the one hand, is giving them the seeds, the physical seeds. On the other hand, is giving them, it could be a blessing, it could be an education, it could be a combination of the two, that is going to make this time the seed succeed. There's a discussion brought in the Midrash that Rashi brings, that prior to this, Yosef, they come to ask Yosef for food, and he says he'll only give them food if they do a Brit Milah. They'll circumcise themselves. You can imagine the Egyptians are not so excited to do this, and they come complaining to Paro. And Paro said, well, he told you the famine was coming. Why didn't you plant your own seeds? And they say, we tried to, but our seeds all died and rotted in the sand. So the message here is that he says there's more to growing corn, wheat, than seeds. There's also something, there's the neshama. There's also, you can call it education, you can call it neshama. They may be the same, they may be related, two different things, but there's something deeper that comes to it, and that is the hay. So literally, the translation in English, in the English translations I saw, was here. Here is the zera, here is the seed, but I think the here means more than that. And again, hopefully by the end of this shiur, we'll understand what that means. The numerical number is 5, and we need to understand what 5 is, right? We said that 4 is the 4 directions. And the Maharal always says that when you have a odd number after an even number, it comes to tell you the 5th number is the point in the middle. So the number 5 is the center point that brings the other 4 together. What is the sound of hay? So first of all, it's a breath, right? Heather Brown, when you called me last night and I was running, you heard quite a heavy breath. But that is my association of the sound hay. But in addition, we know that just like when we spoke about bet, the letter b means inside, the word hay means the or the. Okay, hakelev is the dog. So we have a letter that means gives substance to the thing that it's describing afterwards, the dog. Moving on to the shape of the hay. Okay, we have the shape in big on top over here. And actually, see, it's actually a dalet with a little yud upside down, closing it off. Now, you could, so it means we have a vav and a vav, a wide one and a narrow one, which is, again, exactly the dalet that we spoke about before. Now, the hay, a few things that Chazal say about this. One of the things they say that this world was created with the letter hay. And we'll talk about it more in the next slide. But there's something special about the hay that represents this world. And finally, the first word in the Torah that starts with the letter hay is the word Hashemayim. Okay, Berashit bara Elokim et Hashemayim, and I've highlighted the hay over there. I hope you can all see it. And what we can do is we can do that. Okay, and interesting to see that the Hashemayim comes right next to Haaretz, right? The heavens and the earth. But the emphasis is the first word is the Shemayim, and not the earth. So how do we bring this all together? What is the idea of the hay? I think starting with the shape is the best starting point over here. If we say that the dalet, we said last week, was the dal, was somebody who's got no spirituality at all, somebody who's completely downtrodden, somebody who's got nothing to offer. And it actually symbolizes this world, right? If you compare our world to the spiritual world that created us, there's nothing much over here, even though you look around and you see lots of exciting things. But in terms of spirituality, it's dull, okay, in English and Hebrew. And what the hay does, it says that if you put the yud in the hay, you remember the yud, the upside down yud that we spoke about in the aleph. In other words, if you realize that in this world, even though it appears dull, even though there appears to be downtrodden and simple and nothing there, but if you look close enough, inside the dalet is actually a yud, there's actually the upside down yud. And then what you do is you actually turn the dalet into a hay. Into a hay is also Hashem's name. She should have written this here also. In other words, what the hay is the transition, is the process of taking the dalet and growing it into realizing the spirituality. Okay? Now, it sounds a little bit similar to what we said about the aleph. Just to remind you, we'll backtrack quickly to the aleph. That we said the aleph has got the Hashem on the top, the little yud on top, and this world on the bottom separated by the vav. So here we also have the little yud on the bottom. The difference is that here it's coming from the top, the projection from Hashem. This is what the world that I'm giving you. When we're coming to the hay, we're at the bottom looking up. We're in this world, we have the dalet, and all of a sudden we're adding the yud and we're saying, wow, there is Hashem in this world. Okay, so with that idea, I want to go again through the qualities and we'll see how it fits in. And then we'll move on to some more points. So first of all, we spoke about the Yosef giving the blessing, giving the bracha to the Egyptians. In other words, on the one hand, he gives them the wheat, the physical wheat. He's giving them the dalet, part of the hay. On the other hand, he's giving them the neshama, he's telling them how to plant it. In other words, if you really want your life to grow, you have to give it love, you have to give it affection, you have to give it spirituality. In other words, you have to turn the dalet into a hay. In terms of the numerical value, okay, and I mentioned the mara, if we said 4 are the 4 directions, north, east, south, and west. In other words, everything in the world as you look around, on a superficial level as you look at it. 5, the 5th dot is the dot in the middle. It's the point that brings them all together. It's the unity. It makes you realize that everything is actually one. It reminds us very much of the one in the aleph. Remember, we said the aleph was echad, was one, and the meaning of aleph is 1,000. In other words, when you look at in all the directions and you see the myriad of things, if you're capable of seeing the little yud in the middle of the dalet, you realize that everything's one. So the number 5 is the 5th number brings it all together. And that is in fact the breath, right? The breath in something, the life, is what turns, is the difference between a living being and a dead being. The Midrash says that when Hashem created man, he created the body, man and woman together, he created them from sand. Sand symbolizing physicality. And that comes from the bottom. Sand is the lowest thing on earth. But then he breathed, so to speak. Obviously, Hashem hasn't got a mouth, but it's very symbolic that he breathed from his mouth into man's mouth so that we have a little bit of Hashem inside us. And that breath turned man from a part of the ground into a living being. And that is, I think, the word "the," right? When you say dog, you just say the word dog. Do you say the dog or the dog? You're giving it life, you're giving it emphasis, you're giving it significance. What gives it significance? What gives it significance is the breath, is the neshama inside it. And here I think also is hinted at in the pasuk. I haven't seen this written, but I think it's just so clear when you look at it. It's coming to tell us that Hashem created Hashemayim v'et haaretz. In other words, you look at the world, you see the Aretz. But the Shemayim emphasizes the spirituality. That is the Ikar, that is the main point of the Hay. In other words, what Hashem created was the Shemayim in the Aretz. Hashem created the Aretz in order that we can add the spirituality. Okay? And by the way, how do we do all this all? We do this with all the letters that we said before, right? If we backtrack to over here, in preparation for the Hay, we realize that there's an Hashem. We realize that he gives it a spirituality needs a physical housing. We realize that we have to find a balance between these two extremes. And then we start giving it to the Dalit. Once we have this complete system in order, we have the Hay. We're going to come back to this in a moment. But let me just break for a second to see if there are questions, because I think that captures the main idea of the Hay before we get to some extra points that emphasize the same idea. Is that clear? Do we need some more clarification on the point? And of course, everybody's on mute, so it must be very clear. Okay. Okay, so the Hay is the point in the middle, if you like, the neshama that's inside us, that gives life, that gives the world the life. And we'll look at a few more points, some other ideas about the Hay. And we quoted right in the beginning, the very first session we had, about the Gemara in page 104 in Masechet Shabbat, in the Tractate of Shabbat, that talks about the Dardake, the little kids that are learning ideas on the alphabet. And they bring the letters in pairs, AlephBet, Aleph Bina. We'll learn education. That's the AlephBet we spoke about, that they're a pair. Okay, that's the AlephBet, to teach understanding. Gimel Dalet, the kids said are Gomel Dalim, okay, to bestow to the poor people. And that's exactly the Gimel Dalet that we learned about. And when they come to Hay, they say, Hey Vav, that's the name of Hashem. Okay, we've just finished a few weeks ago Simchat Torah and Shmini Atzeret. And on Simchat Torah, on the whole of Sukkot, we walked around with the lulav and etrog around the bima. And while we were saying, one of the things we said as we were walking around, we said, Ani v'hu, Hoshiana. And we used the word Ho, Hey Vav. That's one of the names of Hashem. And I saw, I think it was in Rav Zamir's book, that Hey Vav hints to the 5 books of the Torah and the 6 books of the Mishnah, that together those books tell us about Hashem. Now the books are just books, right? The books are just like dalets. So they're pieces of paper or manuscripts, or even at the klaf. They're nothing more than ink and paper or animal skin. But when you add the Hashem, when you add the Hey Vav to them, they got kedusha. For example, if a non-Jew writes a Torah, word for word, exactly according to the shapes of the letters and whatever, it doesn't have the spirituality, the holiness, and you don't have to treat it with respect like you treat a Sefer Torah. Okay, we believe that sometimes you go to hotels and they give you the so-called Holy Bible with the New Testament and the Old Testament together. That Old Testament doesn't have any holiness, and you don't have to treat it with holiness. What gives it the holiness is the neshama that comes in this representation. And then I want to come with something mentioned. It's mentioned, maybe some of you have heard it before. It's a very important idea. There's a verse in Isaiah that says, Bitchu b'Hashem adei ad, trust God forever, ki beya Hashem tzur olamim. Literally, because God, 2 different names of God. One is Yud K, Yud and Hey, and the other one is the usual name of Hashem that we say. He is the eternal rock, right? The eternal light. Now, the rabbis explained that there's a hint over here. Why do we have two different names of Hashem? So they said there's a hint over here. It says the word olamim. Olamim is the word olam, world, in plural, two worlds. What are the two worlds? The world to come, the higher world, and our world, this world. And it says that Hashem created these two worlds with these two letters, with the Yud and the Hey. The Yud, we mentioned in one of the previous sessions, symbolizes Hashem. We know that Hashem's name written over here begins with the Yud, not because the Yud's a small letter, not because Hashem's small, but because our perception of him is so small that we can't really understand him. Right? We can look at a star in the distant galaxy, and it appears very, very small, even though the star could be far bigger than our sun. But to us, from where we are, it appears small. And our understanding of the unlimited Hashem is small like a Yud. But this world is created with the letter Hey. And Chazal, the rabbis say, why the letter Hey? They say because the Hey's got a big hole at the bottom and a small hole at the top. The big hole at the bottom is that if you're not careful, you can fall out, right? This is a physical world, and there's lots of good things that can happen, but if you don't watch yourself, you can fall down to the wrong place. That's the bad news. The good news is that there's a little hole on top, and that's called the hole of tshuva. And if you climb up and if you work hard enough, you can always, no matter how hard you fall, you can always climb back up again. But I think the message over here, from what we said on this previous slide, that is what this world is about, right? This world is taking the same Yud that the world to come is created and putting it in the center of the Dalet, of the physical world. And then you get a Hey, which is also sometimes considered Hashem's name. Another idea that relates, that again enhances this concept of the Hey, is the Sukkah, right? We just mentioned earlier, we finished Sukkot a few weeks ago. And some people have a nice vort that how many walls do you need in a Sukkah? So normally you have 4 walls in a Sukkah. Just like the samach in the Sukkah is a closed, almost like a square. But even if you have 3 walls and one side open, like the second letter in the Sukkah, like the kaf, the Sukkah is also kosher. Not only that, but if you have 2 walls and the third wall isn't even complete, but you have a short distance from the other 2 walls, and it's a certain size, has to be at least more than a tefach, and the gap here has to be 3 tefachim, which is whatever, about 20 centimeters. This is also kosher Sukkah. So what we see is the Hey symbolizes the walls of the Sukkah. And this comes to tell us, the Sukkah's got 2 parts. The Sukkah's got the walls, which you can make of any physical material. They have to be strong. They can't be floppy, and they can't be flapping too much. If they do, you've got to strengthen them. But there's no requirement for them to be spiritual. They just got to be strong. The walls of the Sukkah, that they look like this from a bird's eye view, they symbolize this world. That's why they're the letter Hey. On the other hand, the schach that comes on top, it has to come from nature. And that symbolizes, although it comes from made of leaves, it symbolizes God's presence. It comes to tell us that in this world, you have the physical world, but the physical world is a basis for the spiritual world. In other words, the Dalet is the base for the Yud. Now, I've got to tell you something that relates to this. I'm giving the same set of shurim in Hebrew to the kollel that I'm learning at. And when I spoke to them about the Aleph, and I'm backtracking again to the Aleph, and we spoke about the spiritual Yud on the top and the Vav separating with the physical Yud. And one of the people over there, a guy called Yossi Runt, he said, Yehuda, if you take away the physical Vav, the physical Yud, the whole Aleph becomes very unstable. And it comes to teach us that in this world, you cannot be spiritual if you're not physical. Right? We don't believe in being monks and isolating ourselves from the world. We believe that what our role in this world is to have the physical world on the bottom, but it becomes a basis for the spiritual world. And that's exactly what the hay is about. We take the dalet, and on top of the dalet, we look for this dimension of the yud and find the spirituality in the yud. Just like Yosef says, Hey lachem chita, and he finds inside he gives the spirituality, the hay, the life of breath inside the body. Another interesting thing is that in Hebrew, we know that the letter hay normally makes, in the singular, a word from masculine to feminine, like Yeled becomes Yalda, just by adding the word hay. And this is true both with nouns and with verbs. Hu halach, he halcha. Okay? And that is, in fact, what hinting to what the female can do in this world. The female is capable of taking, again, stereotyping men and women, taking men with their alter ego and always wanting to do things and going out and doing something. The woman is capable of slowing men down and saying, let's add some love, some emotion, some spirituality to it. She's capable of turning the yeled into a yalda. And that is the hay that appears all over in Hebrew. In a similar light, we see in last week's parsha, Avraham, when he was born, he was called Avram, and as part of his growth, he gets the letter Hey added to his name. And Rashi says there, till now he was Avram, just the Abba. You learned about the letters Av before, right? The Av of Aram, where he was born. But now he's Av Hamon Goyim. Now he becomes the father of everybody. And how does he do it? By getting the hay, by having a physical basis for his spirituality. In a similar fashion, Sarah changes her yud to something that's completely spiritual, to something that's more acceptable, more adaptive to this world. The dalet that has the yud, but it has the dalet with it. So both Abraham and Sarah get a hay. Straight after this, they're blessed with a baby, and which is in the beginning of this week's parsha. So the creation of life in this world is based on the hay, because what the hay does, it combines physicality and spirituality. It combines the physical body with the spiritual neshama. And the final point that relates to everything we said is in the creation itself, going back right to the beginning of Berashit, where every day we know it so well. Hashem created on the first day heaven and light, and he said, Vayi erev vayi boker yom echad. The second day, Vayi erev vayi boker yom sheni. Third day, yom shlishi, yom revi'i, yom chamishi. On the sixth day, there's an important difference. Instead of saying Vayi erev yom shishi, after man is created, he says yom hashishi. This is the only day it adds the word hay. And immediately the rabbis, and Rashi brings it on the Torah, he said this hay reminds us of another hay, another 5. And that is the 5th of Sivan, in another 2,500 years' time, after creation. Hashem is going to give the Torah to Am Yisrael on the 5th, on the hay, it's the numerical way of hay, of Sivan. Why is it so important to mention this at the creation? The message here is that the creation is not a creation for creation's sake. The purpose of creation is in order to add the spirituality into the world. The purpose of creation is to take the dalet and turn it into a hay. And that's why here in creation, as soon as man is created, man is the first being that has this combination of a body and the soul. The Torah sums up as says, Yom Hashishi. This is the completion. Before we end up with the last slide, I want to ask you again if there's, I'm going to stop sharing for a few minutes, we can see each other. if there's any questions on this, because I've covered a lot. But again, the main message is that the Hey is the combination of the lowest being. We came from Aleph through AlephBet Gimel Dalet Hey to the lowest being of the Dalet. And now we're building it up again by adding the Neshama, and we're building up the Hey again. So if we're okay, if we're good at that, I'm going to put the presentation back. And I'm going to, again, show this picture, but I'm going to do it with a little bit of animation this time. So we have the AlephBet Gimel Dalet, and the rabbis tell us that this corresponds to Hashem's name. Now, if you remember, we spoke previously that the idea of fractals, that Hashem created the world in such a way that these spiritual ideas appear in big ways and small ways. It appears in the world as a whole. It appears in each person. It appears in each apple that you eat. It appears in everything. And the model that appears over and over again is Hashem's name. And that is the Yud, Hey, and Vav, and Hey. Now that we understand the Hey, and we understand the AlephBet Gimel Dalet, I just want to show how this fits in with what we've learned. Okay? We said the Aleph was Hashem. We also said that Yud represents Hashem. In other words, the first of the process is always the Yud, the little Hashem that appears everywhere. The Hey is like a house. It provides a dalet, a housing for the Yud, just like the Bet provided a housing for the Aleph. Okay? And the Hey is the feminine. These are almost like a couple, like a mother and father, the Yud and the Hey. When these are brought together, the third letter of Hashem's name is Vav. They combine together, and that's why the Vav means and. It's called in Hebrew Vav HaChibur, the Vav that joins. That's why the third letter of Hashem is a Vav. Brings these two together to create the Gimel, to create Yaakov, which is the ultimate balance, which is now able to give. And once you have these three together, again, the combination of them together work opposite another Hey. Just like this Hey received the light from Hashem, this Hey will receive the light from this team of three giving together. And you could ask, what is the difference between this Hey and this Hey? The upper Hey is like a wife to her husband. Even though she's receiving what he's got to give, they're on the same level. They're both working as a team, having slightly different roles, but one is not higher than the other. As opposed to the Hey on the bottom, this is like the child that is definitely lower than them, receiving on a receiving end, and needs to build himself up to eventually get to their level. So that sums up AlephBet Gimel Dalet and Hey for today. And we'll ask any questions before I turn on the recordings, and then you can all start breathing.
May I ask a question, please?
Please do.
On the top side and sometimes on the side of the letters, the appendages. For example, on the Gimel, there are three lines going upwards, two to the side and one to the center. And you look at some of the other letters, they've also got things on top, one with a line and a box on top of the line. Is there any significance to those, or are those just aesthetics? You get that?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm displaying all the letters here to show everybody your question. So if you see, some of the letters don't have, these are called crowns, right? The Gimel's got one, and the Zayin's got, and the Ayin and the Nun, okay? And
the
these
Shin.
are called, and the Shin, and these are called Tagim, or crowns.
Right.
They definitely have significance. And in Rav Kook's book, just like he says a whole section on the letters, and another whole section on the vowels, another whole section on the trop, on the ta'amim, he has a whole section on the crowns. There's definitely significance. There's something important about these letters. The term is called shatnez gatz, because those are the letters, Shat, Netz, Gaz, that have these crowns. And yes, they definitely get significance. And I'm not going to get into the significance because hopefully in, I guess about 4 months' time, we'll get to them and we'll discuss them, and I'll refresh my memory and present it properly. But I'll just say a lovely midrash that's brought in the Gemara about these letters. And the midrash describes Moshe Rabbeinu looking up from above and seeing Rabbi Akiva giving a lesson on all the crowns of these letters. And Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't understand what's being given. And he gets a bit disheartened. And then one of the pupils, then he hears Rabbi Akiva saying, obviously looking many generations in the future, the pupils ask, Rabbi, where do you know this from? They say to the Rabbi Akiva says, this is halacha Moshe mi Sinai. This we learned from Moshe in Sinai. Now this is something that's so deep that Moshe implanted the foundations in the letters without consciously knowing what they were going to be, but created the basis for the Torah Be'al Peh, for the Torah that we can take and expand based on the roots that were given there. So yes, there's definitely meaning, and I will try to get to it, but it'll be.
Sorry, so early asking that question. But anyway.
It's an excellent question.
Okay.
Can I say that was incredible? It's 10:30 at night after a big day, and I was fully engaged. So Shkoyach, thank you.